Hello,
Hello.
welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing another part of our chronicle of our journey through PDA from pregnancy all the way through to diagnosis, school and beyond. If you haven't already, please make sure you check out the previous videos. There'll be links somewhere up here. And today we're going to be talking about school. So as Max's time at nursery started to come towards an end, we were looking at the next step and what school we wanted him to go to, or what school he wanted to go to. Trying to take into consideration all the things we felt he needed, the difficulty he'd had settling in nursery, and the ongoing concerns we had that were still being addressed. We looked at schools in the local area and decided very quickly that he would be best at one that was small, with not many people, because how would he go from a nursery of 10-15 kids to a school of 300, 400, 500, and going around visiting them, that was very much what he seemed to respond to as well. So we put our first choice in and didn't get it, so we appealed.
It was a long process.
And again, we didn't have a diagnosis quite by this point. I think the diagnosis came
literally the week that he turned 5, and he started school on the day of his birthday when he turned 5. So it was literally in that week of starting school. It was a very big week for us.
So trying to go through the appeals process without any kind of medical backup was challenging. We had to go to an appeals panel to appeal the decision, and his key worker from nursery very kindly came with us to support what we were saying and give her opinion. And it was our first kind of real experience of having to fight for something with an official, and it was quite daunting, quite scary for us who, you know, we're quite used to just doing what we're told. And it was very difficult to kind of go through that situation and fight for what your child needs, but at the same time you do whatever your child needs you to do because you're the parent. So we didn't get into that school, so he was put into another school, which was a big school, which was also local, but it was a big school. It was a primary school of like several hundred kids, and initially we thought that would be okay. We went to the open evening and met the staff, and everything seemed fine until we found out that one of the reasons why we'd liked it was the head teacher, who was the Senko, and she was retiring, which we hadn't been told.
And they had no Senko at the time when he started. So he was very, because we had no diagnosis, they were like, well, you've not got a diagnosis, so there's nothing we can do.
So we got about 2 weeks, I think, into the term, and from day one at the end of school was like nothing we had ever experienced before in our lives. We thought he had found things difficult before then. That was nothing compared to what it was like. And initially it was a case of, oh, maybe it's just because it's new and because it's tiring, but it was every day. And we would literally get to the car and he would be screaming and shouting and meltdowns like we had never seen before.
I spoke to the teacher about this, and said that it was going on for hours and hours and hours on end. And she said to me, every child has meltdowns after school, which was probably the worst possible thing she could have said to me, because that didn't seem like it should be what children do.
Not to the level he was doing it at.
Yeah.
Not, this wasn't just he was tired and grumpy after school. This was the slightest thing would cause, he was like a different person. Like we didn't recognise the child that he was after school because he was completely different, and we were scared for him. We weren't happy that he was feeling this way. We then got a phone call.
I'd come back from dropping Max at school. It was a really distressing time because he was having a meltdown in the car, and I wouldn't go into school. I eventually managed to I think you went in with him for a little bit.
I think I went in and stayed like 10-15 minutes.
Yeah, and then you went off to work, and I came home, and I just sobbed. I sobbed because I felt this is not right. I felt it in my gut that it wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do about it, and I didn't know how to change it. And then I got this phone call from, I think it was the school admissions, saying that Max had got into the school that we had to appeal for. And we were elated. We thought, this is wonderful. But we then had to make the hard decision, to move him from the school that he was at into this smaller school.
And knowing how he found change difficult, and how, even though he was not finding school by any means easy, he'd already started to make a couple of tentative friends. He knew a couple of children who were there from nursery as well. And all the change it was going to involve, we were very uncertain about what to do, whether we should move him and risk causing him more distress. But ultimately we decided that the school that we had wanted him to go to was smaller, it was a bit closer, it was much easier to get to in the mornings as well, so that we didn't have to get him up and start getting ready quite as early for an extra few minutes. And we took him for a taste today, didn't we? And
it was superhero day. He was really into superheroes at that point, so he was loving the fact that he could wear a mask to be the character, and his costume, and he loved the whole thing.
And that was on the Friday, and over the weekend we thought about it, and then we decided on the Monday that yes, this is what we're going to do. So we contacted the admissions and changed his schools, and he started there probably must have been Tuesday.
Yeah.
And again, we tried to stagger his starts. He only went for half days, as he had done at the original school for the first few days. We managed to arrange for his key worker from nursery, who he'd only been a few weeks since he was last with her, to come in with him, so he had a familiar face in the classroom to help him settle, which was met with some resistance by the school, which was probably our first sign that maybe things weren't going to be as
plain sailing
as we'd hoped they were, and that they'd made out things would be for him. But
they arranged a Senko meeting with us.
Yeah.
And we thought, brilliant, this is fantastic. This is what Max needs. They promised us the earth of everything that they could offer us, which was amazing.
But we still were having the exact same situation at the end of the day with Max. He would still come out. Sometimes he wouldn't even get to the car before he would have a meltdown. We were always the last car to leave the car park, because I wouldn't be able to drive with him screaming and shouting and being in the situation he was in. And it was quite startling one day when we were in the car. He was having a massive meltdown, and a teacher had been parked next to us, and as soon as he saw the teacher, it was like that, and he was like a different person, and everything that had just been there was gone, and he was placid and calm and exactly like in control for as long as the teacher was within earshot and eyeshot. And the second they were out of shot and earshot again, it was snapped back into that huge screaming meltdown panic attack. And that was the first time we kind of saw him masking and realised what it really was.
Yeah.
We'd read about masking and knew something that could happen with children with PDA, but it was the first time we saw it kind of for ourselves. And that kind of highlighted the issue that we then started to have with school, because even though he had a diagnosis, as soon as we had the diagnosis, we printed off information and gave it to the teachers.
Particularly about masking as well. There's a specific one from the PDA Society about masking that I handed to them, and asked them to read it.
They said they were going to go on a course to learn about it. We don't know whether they did or not. We were never really told to us whether they did or not. It didn't seem to us that they did, because nothing ever seemed to really change. But he got through his reception year, got into the first year, and things got a bit tougher, because now instead of going in and playing every day, he was having to sit down and do work. He was finding it increasingly difficult at playtimes because he wanted to do one thing, and if any of the children didn't want to do that, wanted to do what they wanted to do because they all want to do it themselves, he couldn't understand why they didn't want to do what he wanted. So he would have a lot of conflict with other children and didn't know how to deal with that. He had to change teacher because his teacher went on maternity leave, so we had a new teacher come into the classroom who he didn't get on particularly well with, and things started to go backwards, and we started to have real difficulties getting him to go into the classroom in the mornings. We discussed this with the school, and we tried having a badge system where he would have a badge to show how he was feeling, so that if he didn't want to express it himself, he could show them to warn them. So a green badge would say he was fine, yellow was that he was struggling a bit, and red was he really needed help. But that only worked until we left the house, and as soon as we got to school he wanted to turn it to green because he didn't want anyone to know that he was finding things hard, so that didn't work. We tried having books about things like going to sleep, and that the teachers would try and guide us in things that they found work with other children, which made absolutely no difference to us whatsoever. And we had a book that was supposed to go back and forth between us and the school.
A communication book, which wasn't particularly helpful.
The whole point of it was so that we could try and spot patterns where things that had happened during the day might cause meltdowns in the evening, or vice versa.
Yeah.
But we found as soon as we were being honest and writing down quite exactly how difficult things were in the evenings, and then we would get back, he had a really good day today, which is really unhelpful. And
they just didn't spot the things that you can tell when Max is struggling with sensory issues or being given a demand. They didn't have the resources to be able to spot those things.
He was supposed to have something called push and pull at the end of every day, for half an hour before the end of the day, to try and help him regulate.
And it wasn't done consistently.
But it wasn't done every day. It was done whenever there was a teacher free to do it. It was very hit and miss. And
these were all recommended by the either paediatrician or the OT as well. And the OT even went in to discuss with them extra things that they could do. And this was brought on with criticism as well.
They didn't want the OT to go in to begin with.
Yeah.
And were quite resistant to her suggestions, even questioning whether or not the diagnosis was right.
Which is not their place at all. When the paediatrician has already diagnosed him, they should just go with what they've been told. And they didn't do that. And
ultimately, in one of the meetings, we were told, well, we wish you could see what we see at school. He's a lovely, kind, caring boy. And we were like, well, we've shown you videos of what happens at home when he gets home, and you can see that he's really struggling. And we discussed applying for more funding for.
They said that he wouldn't get the extra funding because he doesn't have the things that require the extra funding.
They weren't spending the amount of money on his extra needs that they would need to qualify for the extra funding, to which we said, well, why not? Because
you should be doing all these things that the OT has suggested and the paediatrician, so therefore that should be the amount that the OT even said that should be enough. And even when the Senko was filling it out, he said, I don't think we'll get this, which we ended up having discussions with him in great detail, and feeling sort of slightly attacked and like we were in the wrong, which isn't fair, and it's not what you want to feel when you're a parent trying to help your child and having the stress and the emotions at home. You don't need somebody to be saying those things to you and making you feel like it's you as a parent.
So ultimately it came to the point of he was at the start of year 2.
Yeah.
First term of year 2, and it was getting progressively harder.
There was days when we brought him into school and we struggled to get him even out of the car. The head teacher said to us, just bring him and put him in school.
We'll deal with it.
And we'll deal with it. That's not how we work, and that's not fair on Max.
And also, I don't think physically either of us could have manhandled him into school with him thrashing and kicking and screaming the way he was. Someone would have got hurt. I mean, you know, we'd had injuries happen by accident during meltdown stuff at home, so can you imagine what it would have happened if he'd been around other kids? And ultimately he didn't want to be around other kids when he felt like that, because he knew that he didn't trust himself to be able to maintain control, and that was what was causing him so much distress. It was the having to mask and keep all these feelings suppressed throughout the day to keep himself safe, keep his friends safe, and not do anything that made himself feel like he was different and an outsider. That when he came home and he was in a safe space, he had to let all that out, and that was what was causing the huge, massive meltdowns. But trying to get that out of him, and then when we finally did get it out of him, trying to then get him to explain that to the teachers, because whenever we would then go into school and say, this is what Max has told us, he would mask and go, no, fine, no, everything's fine, yeah, I really enjoy doing that. Even when we had video proof of us recording him saying these things the night before, he was so scared and embarrassed about sharing them, he wouldn't open up.
And the school then thought it was us even more so because of that, you know.
So ultimately, you done again, research queen. Had done a lot of research about educating and ways to make it work, and we discussed home educating. And again, you know, we had reservations about it, about his social interaction and how we would manage to do it with work and health and having another child and so on and so on. We went along to a home education group one day to see what that was like, and really found that really refreshing and really useful and supportive. And I think after the last week he missed several days, and the head teacher was very anti absence, so we were made to feel guilty that he was missing school when he was missing school either because he was ill from having caught a bug, or because he was ill mentally from being so distressed not being able to leave the house.
She confronted us on the playground in front of other parents, and specifically said to us about the attendance, and I said to her, you do know that you can put that down as I don't know what it's called, authorised absence because of his disability. And she said yes, but it's still he's absent, he's not learning, and it's absence.
Because obviously their concern from her point of view was that he wouldn't be able to then perform and get a good enough mark when it came to exams and qualifications and stuff, and look poorly on the school. So we made the decision to take him out of school. Everything that we'd hoped that school might be good for him for actually turned out to be almost the reverse, because it was so small, it didn't have the resources or the staff to be able to meet his needs. And so we took him out of the school and decided to home educate him, and about a month later decided to do the same thing with his brother, because it wasn't fair on his brother to be having to go to school. One, why I got to go to school, my brother's at home, and two, getting asked all these questions from people at school about what's going on. And then as the world turned about a month later, everything happened, and everyone's been homeschooling for about a year, so it's actually not been very different to what it probably would have been like in the first place. But
it's been the best decision we've ever made to do with education for him. He has less meltdowns. He still has them, but they're not as long and they're not as explosive.
It was like we had our child back for the first time in nearly 2.5 years.
We can have discussions with him. It took him a bit of time to get used to the idea of being home educated, and get used to routines of what we were doing.
And obviously it's not been a normal year, so we're not in the normal kind of routine of what we had hoped to be doing with it, home educating, because we can't go anywhere, we can't do anything, and everyone else is off school as well, so that's obviously challenging in itself, because he finds it difficult to understand that their school's closed and their parents are letting them do whatever, so why can't I? When well, it's still a school day. We still have to do learning. We still have to do bits and pieces, that we have planned. But it allows us to tailor things to his PDA and his interests, and that is the key thing we are doing. Is everything is based, and there's been a few times where we've started to stray away from that without meaning to, and started to go, oh, we need to do some writing, we need to do some reading, we need to do some numbers. We haven't done any of that in ages, and he will start to resist that and find it really difficult, and it kind of makes us slam the brakes on and go, right, we need to go back to what we were doing before. What are his interests? Find ways with those interests to then work on other things. So at the moment he's very interested in history and the Stuarts.
And we find ways to bring in maths and writing and things like that in with that, but so he's happy to do them, not so that it's like separate subjects, which helps. And
it's just using those interests. And there's times where you're not restricted by a school day, so he will do learning in the evening or at weekends, or in half term. If
he's learning all the time, it's not just we're sitting down to do some learning now. He's learning from the minute he gets up to the minute he goes to sleep. Life is learning. And
taking on self-learning as well. He'll come to us several times a day and be like, I've just learned this about this and this, and the things we don't even know about. And as long as he is able to do the basic skills that he'll need to be able to function in a society, writing, reading, numbers, other than that, we're quite happy to be guided by his interests, because surely if he has an interest that he can stay with for the next 10-15 years, imagine how much of an expert on something he would be if he spent the next 10-15 years learning about it and he's passionate about it, compared to leaving school at 15, 16, 17 with a very broad range of knowledge but nothing that he really is passionate about and knows what he wants to do about next. So we're not saying that he's going to be home educated for the rest of his life. He might be, he might not be. He may decide he wants to go to school. We may decide he's better off going to school. We don't know. But as of this moment, it works for us, and we're very happy with the way things are going. We've been very, very lucky with the LEA as well. They've been very supportive, and the guy who we speak to has been very helpful with things, and he knows a lot about PDA, so that has been really, really useful. And not everyone's experience is like that. It can be very, very varied. So that's just our experience. That's not everyone's experience. And I would suggest anybody who's thinking of doing home educating or wanting to pursue it, seek advice from professionals who know much more about it than we do. Absolutely. There are Facebook groups that you can join for home education for your local area, and also for helping to deal with LEAs as well. So you can check those out. And the support through things like Sunshine Support, Past, Laura Kirby, who we've worked with in the past. So there's lots of help out there if you haven't already sought them out, and if you have, then great. We'll do a further video on home education, I think, because I think a lot of people have been asking us about that as well, so that we'll try and do another video on that. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you found this video useful, and the whole series in general. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any uploads, and we'll be back soon with another lot. Bye. Bye.